Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Cinemacast, our movie review podcast, right here on YouTube and on Rumble. Please hit that like, that follow, subscribe down below if you guys enjoy our content on these channels. Welcome back to the cinema, guys. Here's another treat for you. Today's feature is a special one from 1989. Where Sylvester Stallone and Kurt Russell were pretty much at their prime, or just getting started with a slew of action movies, comedies, and such. Even if they were pretty much duds in a way, they are still considered gems today to diehard fans. Today we are taking a look at Tango and Cash. This is a 1989 American buddy cop action comedy film, which of course stars Sylvester Stallone, Kurt Russell, Terry Hatcher, and Jack Palance. Man, buddy cop movies were a big thing back in the day. You don't see too many buddy cop movies nowadays unless it's a sequel to something that, took place 20, 30 years ago and they're trying to cash in on, well, let's say, Bad Boys. They had Bad Boys for Life and Bad Boys Ride or Die, which turned out to be two pretty decent sequels in my opinion, but it seems like there's not a whole lot of these buddy cop action movies that tend to take place or even get noticed or even get made nowadays, and it's sad because these movies, they are very action packed and they have a lot of good comedy with them. Take for instance Beverly Hills Cop, or even the Lethal Weapon movies with Mel Gibson and Danny Glover. And those movies, they were at the height in the 80s and the 90s. And I guess it just pretty much died off into the 2000s. And then you got a slew of action movies. You got a slew of drama movies that are all the same cliche. And then, of course, the big driver of movie theaters nowadays is Marvel or DC. And everybody gets pretty much tired of a Marvel movie. You got your action comic stars, like Iron Man. You got the Hulk, Thorn. I'm sorry. You got Thor. You got Spider-Man. Over in DC, you got Superman. You got Batman, and it's like you got a slew of Marvel and DC movies, superhero movies, and that just seems to be the driver of movie theaters nowadays. Everybody just goes to see the next big Marvel movie, and of course, in today's day and age, everything gets too political, too politicized. Everything is too woke. It's not like it used to be back in the 80s and 90s, and that's the time period where I'm like, take me back to when movies were simple, movies were entertaining, even if it was a little bit cheesy for this time and may not have aged very well today. But let me tell you, movies back then, this was all we had, and we made the best of it. If it sucked for you, so be it. But some of these movies I tend to check out, and it's just something that I have never really seen, and I quite enjoy, especially a movie like this. Even if some of the subplots, some of the plot to it is missing, or maybe there's something that just it should have been there, but it was just end up missing, and you're just focused on one thing. And I think that's my issue with a movie like Tango and Cash. It has a straightforward plot where two cops who are pretty much not in competition with each other, but they don't really quite like each other, and they're within the same area restrictions, and they're busting down on a crime. Well, let's go into the plot in a little bit. Okay, so this movie was directed by 3 directors. I've seen movies that had 2 directors, but this one has 3 directors, and one of which I can't pronounce his last name. It looks kind of, I don't know, Polish or Slavic or something, but his first name is Andre. And then you got Albert Magnoli and Peter McDonald. 3 directors. Wow. Wonder why it took 3 directors to direct this movie. So yeah, this film follows the titular pair of rival police detectives who are forced to work together against a criminal mastermind that frames them for murder. And of course, the film it was chiefly directed by Andre. Let's just call him Andre K. With Albert Magnoli and Peter McDonald taking over in the later steps of the filming, with Stuart Baird overseeing post production. The multiple directors were due to a long and troubled production process, which included numerous script rewrites and clashes between Andre and producers John Peters over creative differences. So there we go. They brought in like another different director to take place, during a certain part of the movie. Maybe that's why this movie kind of fell apart the way it did. Even though it's entertaining in its own premise, with the way this movie plays out, yeah, it does feel like it kind of does fall apart in a sense in certain areas where the script should have been rewrote very solidly, but it seems like it's just pieced together, in different areas. It doesn't seem to work out too well. So going over the plot just a little bit. Now, guys, if you have not seen this movie, skip this part, go watch the movie for yourselves, come back and check out the rest of the review. So in Los Angeles, you got Lieutenant Raymond Tango, who's played by Sylvester Stallone on the west side, and Gabriel Cash, played by Kurt Russell on the east side. They are considered the best detectives in the Los Angeles Police Department, where they are both assigned to the Narcotics Division and lauded for numerous successful and daring drug busts across the greater Los Angeles. However, they are opposites in almost every way and are intense rivals, each considering himself to be better despite having never met each other. Unbeknownst to them, however, their intercepted drug shipments belong to a criminal organization headed by Ves Perret, or I think it's Perret or Perret. I think it was Perret. He is played by Jack Palance, of course. And let me tell you this. Jack Palance, he is such a gifted actor. If you don't know who he plays, if you don't know who Jack Palance is, he's most widely well known for movies like City Slickers, his role in City Slickers and a few others. And, of course, he had a role in 1989 Batman, directed by Tim Burton. I gotta say, like, Jack Palance, he is a gifted actor, but this movie was probably not for him. Like, his role in this film was just too watered down. It is very, very cringe. He does not play a very good villain in this movie, and it definitely does show. It's almost like he's placed in there for the role. He tries, but I just gotta say, I don't like him in the presence of as a villain. I don't like him in the presence as a villain because he doesn't do very well. He's very cringe with his part. I don't know if it's because of the script, the way the script was written, but this script was not written very well for Jack Palance. Frustrated, Parrott and his associates plan the revenge against the detectives, but refrain from killing them as to not turn them into martyrs. Instead, Perret, I keep calling him Perret, whatever his name is, devises an elaborate scheme to ruin their lives, frame them for murder. So, of course, it is set up in a way where you don't hear him talk about setting them up for murder. It just happens. They just happen to be there at a certain point in time where the murder had already taken place. One of their weapons is found at the scene of the crime, and the FBI happens to break in, catch them in the middle of the act as they're going off on each other, and of course they end up being arrested and charged and end up locked into a prison, and the prison contains all these hardened criminals that they have caught over the years that want a piece of them. And it's like even it said, like, when you got a criminal drug lord and his associates, they want these guys dead. They just like, let's just kill them. Let's just kill them. And he's like, no. I got much better plan to get them out of our hair for now. We're going to frame them. Well, he doesn't really talk about framing them. He just basically talks about trapping them or placing them somewhere, having them placed somewhere, where they won't be much of a pain to them, So, yeah, these two, they end up as hardened criminals framed for murder, and they spend their time in prison, and then they escape prison, and then the rest of the movie, they got so much time left to clear their names to find out who framed them for murder and why, and find out who it was. And that is pretty much the rest of the movie right there. And of course, with a movie like this, for at its time, with Sylvester Stallone and Kurt Russell, if you're familiar with their work, if you're familiar with their movies, you know they have some wisecracks. You know they have some good jokes in there that bounce off of each other left and right. In fact, there is one joke that kind of breaks the fourth wall within the first 5 minutes of the movie, where Stallone's character Tango, he ends up busting a couple of criminals trying to drive across state or county lines with an oil tanker full of cocaine. And you got the whole police force that's on them too after he makes the bust. And you got one cop that says Tango thinks he's Rambo, or he's being Rambo, and Tango's like, Rambo is such a pussy. And it's very ironic for his character to say that, because Stallone played the character Rambo many years before this movie came out. So for him to call his own character a pussy, yeah, it's like a little joke to himself. It's like, yeah, you just called yourself a pussy, but it's like an inside joke. But, you know, for a movie like this that is action-packed, and it's got a good bit amount of action, but it's also got a good bit amount of humor in it, especially with the interactions between Sylvester Stallone and Kurt Russell. It is just, it's down like, it's a movie that you can enjoy, but like I said, there are some flaws with this movie as well. And of course, you will find a slew of a few of action stars, or even some stars that you may recognize throughout the movie. Like I said, Terry Hatcher is in there. You got Brian James is in there, who was previously in 48 Hours, another 48 Hours prior to that. He was in The Fifth Element. I recognize his face from a few movies that I have seen. You got actor James Hong, who I remember seeing him in RoboCop 3. Then you got the late Robert Zadar. If you don't know who Robert Zadar was, he was in the trilogy Maniac Cop. Then you got Clint Howard, who has a brief part in there as well. And I recognize a few. Let's see, Louis Arquette was in there. Phil Rubenstein was in there. Who else do I recognize here? Jeffrey Lewis. Yep, I've seen him. And I think he was in a couple shows I've seen too. But yeah, he's in there. So there's a few familiar faces that I recognize that are in this movie here. But yeah, apparently there was a lot going on behind the scenes with this film when it was being made, when the script was being rewritten and such. And of course, looking at the critical response of the movie, you know, for its time, of course, Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 31% based on 48 reviews, average of 4.4 out of 10. The critical consensus states that brutally violent and pushingly dull, this cookie-cutter buddy cop thriller isn't even fun enough to reach so good it's bad status. Now, I won't say this movie is brutally violent. It's not really all that violent to begin with. I mean, yeah, some people do end up shot, or some people get beaten up and such. But I wouldn't say it's brutally violent. Now, Stallone, he is known for starring in films that are pretty brutally violent or even graphic at times, such as his Rambo series, especially his fourth Rambo movie, which is, yes, very graphic for what it is. Kurt Russell, I mean, there are some films that Kurt Russell was in that were pretty graphic, especially John Carpenter's The Thing, where he was in, and that was a pretty grotesque movie for its time. But yeah, to say that this movie was brutally violent, like, yeah, this person must have been very democratic, you know, to say something like that. Now, pushingly dull, I don't think I see this movie as being quite dull. Now, there are scenes, like I said, when it comes to Jack Palance's character, yes, it might be a little bit dull with that. It didn't even play out as well as it should have, for him being the villain of the movie. So there are some things that did fall apart within the setting, but I think the main focus for the movie for me was between these two characters, their interactions with each other, their little quirks with each other and toward each other. That is pretty much what steals the show for the movie itself. While everything else is crumbling down around them. It's like you put these two people in a building that's already crumbling down, it's falling down around them, and your main focus is just on these two guys interacting with each other. They may hate each other, they may throw out one-liners to each other while the building is falling around them. You don't know why the building is you don't know why the building is falling around them. You don't know anything. You you're just focused on one thing alone. And like I said, for the time, it's the 80s. You got Stallone, you got Kurt Russell in there. You know, it's a good tag team right there, you know. And especially, like, even if you had Arnold Schwarzenegger in the mix, you know, you got to figure the late 80s transitioning into the 90s, that was a time for action movies that were kind of transitioning. They're not really falling out, but there was a slew of them that were coming out. Same thing with horror movies. It was almost like the middle of the bed. You get to the middle of the bed and you lay there. It's like the most comfortable part of the bed, and you don't want to leave because that's the best part of the bed. No matter how hard it is, no matter how soft it is, no matter how uncomfortable it is or comfortable it is, that's where you want to be, and that's where a movie like this belongs, and that's where it was for its time. On Metacritic, this film has a weighted average score of 41 out of 100 based on 15 critics, indicating mixed to average reviews. The New York Times criticized the plot, screenplay, and the acting. Now, I will say, yes, like I said, the acting was not on par for somebody like Jack Palance. Like I said, he is a very well-known actor. He was very good for his time. Like I said, this was not a role for Jack Palance. It wasn't. You know, he does not play a real good villain. He doesn't play. I haven't seen a whole lot of movies that he was in, but this was one of them that was not meant for him. However, Stallone's used to taking roles which are, whether it can be good, whether it can be bad. Same thing with Kurt Russell. It's a hit or miss. You put them in there in a movie, you know, whether you like them or you don't like them. I feel like for a movie like this, I like them both together. I think they had a very interesting chemistry with each other. The way they clashed, the way they came together in the movie. I feel like it was pretty interesting, even though it wasn't quite played out. It's probably not for everybody. People will probably watch this and think, yeah, they don't really make a good, it's all right. They don't really make a good buddy cop situation. But I think for me, seeing two of these big action stars that came out in the 1980s, you know, and just piece them together, I think they are an interesting mix to the formula of an action buddy cop film, as opposed to a movie that came out a couple decades after, such as The Expendables, where you pit Stallone and Schwarzenegger next to each other. And that is usually like the couple that you want to see, that you expect to see, is Stallone and Schwarzenegger together as two of the biggest action stars from the 80s and the 90s. But I think, like, just a little bit of twist to have Kurt Russell in there with Stallone, I think that made it all the worthwhile, that made this movie a little more interesting to me. Because I've seen more movies with Stallone than I have with Kurt Russell. And I know Kurt Russell, you know, he's made for action. He is made for comedy. He's been in movies like Overboard with Goldie Hawn. And that was a pretty good movie for him right there. You know, being in a comedic role, especially very dramatic as well. One thing I will say about this movie with its accolades. So the movie was nominated for 3 Golden Raspberry Awards for Worst Actor, which is Sylvester Stallone. Like I said, Stallone, he took any role, whatever, you know, whether it was always top notch, Oscar worthy, or even a shitty role. Just like Nicolas Cage. Nicolas Cage will take a role anywhere, no matter what role it is. He will take a role. Same thing with Stallone. I mean, come on, he started out in the 70s as the Italian Stallion in a softcore porn movie. You can look it up, Italian Stallion. I forgot what the main movie was called. Stallone started out in fucking porn. And then he moved his way up in movies like Rocky and Rambo and such. So, yeah. I mean, you can call him worst actor all you want. I think Stallone's acting in this movie was a lot better than Jack Palance, of course. And then you got worst supporting actress. This is interesting to me to read this. So there is a scene in the movie where Kurt Russell's character, Cash, he's trying to make an escape out of a club without being caught by the police. So this girl, this stripper that he runs into, helps him out, gives him some other stripper's clothes, and you see a 30-second scene with Kurt Russell in drag. He's got the wig, glasses, dress, shoes, everything. So they gave Kurt Russell the worst supporting actress, and it says Kurt Russell in drag. Oh my god. Like, come on. They gave him I bet he laughed his ass off when he saw that he won a Razzie for worst supporting actress. I bet that had him rolling around on the floor in tears. It had to have. Like, that is just hilarious. Now, there was talks of a potential sequel that came up back in 2019 where Stallone revealed that he had a story prepared for a potential sequel and was trying to convince Kurt Russell to sign on to the project. But however, Stallone was excited to film a sequel. Kurt Russell was unsure if he wanted to do it, saying that by then they would be in their unprime, being that maybe the young generation, the generation now that pretty much is idiotic, when it comes to politics and such. Yeah, probably wouldn't understand the humor between these old Hollywood actors of Stallone and Kurt Russell. But yeah, as of 2025, there was no further news about any materialization of the sequel to be headed out. But yeah, what do I give Tango and Cash? After watching this, giving it a once over, and I want to say I did enjoy it. I really did enjoy seeing these two guys together, seeing them get out of these situations together the way they were in. Even though the story, the script, it did cave in like a bad pothole in certain areas where it felt like there was pieces missing, pieces that didn't make sense at all when you were trying to piece this movie together. It felt very unfinished in certain sections for this movie when it came to the story. You had actors in there, you had characters that made no sense, you had actors like Jack Palance playing a role which was not meant for him, and he did not play it that well at all. It was very, very cringy. They should have had either somebody else play it, or they should have did his character much, much better. But I feel like, aside from everything crumbling around the main action and what's going on, I did enjoy seeing these two actors together. I did enjoy their interactions. I enjoyed the action sequences when they came together. It was pretty entertaining. This is something I probably will watch again and again if I'm in a mood for it. But I will say the story does fall apart a little bit. It has some potential, but in the end, Tango and Cash, yes, it does have its fair rating with the critics. And I will say, there's probably people out there that do enjoy this movie like I do, and there are probably people out there that are like, it was alright, it wasn't that great. So it's pretty fair. So I would give Tango Cash a 6 out of 10. Even though I did like, both of these action stars together. It's the late 80s going into the 90s. There's a slew of movies, action movies starring these two. There's so many great ones out there. But yeah, a 6 out of 10, I feel, is a fair rating for Tango and Cash. Did you guys check this movie out? Did you see it for yourselves? What do you think about Tango and Cash? Let me know down in the comments section. Let me know your thoughts on this movie. And that does it for today's episode of Cinemacast, guys. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. And thank you for your support. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below if you guys have yet to do so. Thank you very much for coming in for today's feature of Tango and Cash on the Cinemacast podcast. And until next time, guys, we'll catch you right back here at the cinema.